To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Backyard Gardens podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, and that means it is a fantastic day to be alive, right? Every Thursday is. Don't know why. But we got to talk about cover crops today. I've been doing a lot of research on it, and Batavia, she has boned up on her intel on cover crops like you wouldn't believe.
Encyclopedia, man. I have developed an entire Wikipedia page for cover crops.
No. You cannot use encyclopedia and Wikipedia in the same sentence. You have to separate them by the magnitude of 10. They can't be even similar.
I was searching for something completely obscure, and the only source that kept on coming back was non-garden related, was a Wikipedia page. I literally said, all right, fine. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, so what did you, because you don't use cover crops,
I don't.
Right? Yet.
Yeah. I don't yet.
Oh, she said that without hesitating.
Yeah. So the general understanding of cover crops was accurate, but it was that I had going into it was accurate, but it went beyond what I thought. Like I had really, really simplified it in a way, which is what I traditionally do with things that I've not taken a deep dive in. And I still think I'm probably a couple of inches under the surface, so not exactly surface level like I was before, just a couple of inches under, but I'm not like fully immersed. But I enjoyed different references to the whys and people's preferences. I enjoyed learning about that. I enjoyed kind of the timing of it. And I felt like I was able to legitimately take some of my apprehension about it and vet it against the information that I was learning.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's a lot of things in gardening. It can be as easy or as complicated as you want it to be. Now, this is, the first 5 minutes of every show, everybody, is a full disclaimer moment. I have done cover crops in the past. I do not use them regularly until hopefully starting this year, but I have dabbled in them on and off. I have used them. I have read a lot about them, and I'll get into why I had to read so much too as we get into this. But it's very interesting, and I don't want to use the word speculation, but, in my mind, it's always one of those things like it's questionable is like, does this really work? Is this really doing what you want it to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That was probably the biggest apprehension that I had. And it's along the lines, I've said this about a couple of other methods that I kind of view as common for farming. And then I say, can we really pull this down to the home gardener, or the person that has a homestead? And is it really applicable and beneficial in the same ways? Right. So that's a theme that runs through a couple of methods, that crop rotation. I've had the same, question around that in the same way. Well, not crop rotation.
But you have an answer to that one now, right?
Yeah, crop rotation was the one. Well, I mean, it depends on which day you ask me. But so that was an example of, all right, let me push this aside for a moment. Let me read about this. Let me watch some informative videos. And now what's my opinion on it, right?
Yeah. Right. And then the next level would be actually putting that to action and then truly formulating opinion over time. It's not something that just comes out of the blue. Now, while we don't currently have cover crop seeds in our Etsy store, we definitely do have seeds for your enjoyment. So please check us out. The link is below. You are running out of time to get your 10% off, and we are going to try our best to get our fall seeds in the store before that discount code runs out. The discount code is 1,000,000, 10% off, free pack of seeds. And so check that out and all the other links below. And go ahead. She's hovering. I just had to let her do it. So, without further ado, I don't want to change the flow too much. The cover crop aspect of it, where did you start looking it up, Batavia?
So I started with the Farmer's Almanac, right? That was my first source. Okay. And then I started with a YouTuber that's a little bit more local to me, meaning like a bordering state of a bordering state. Because I had theories around like, people doing it in the Midwest compared to people doing it in more southern states, thinking those in more southern states would benefit from it more. So I started in those two spots. And the one piece that I kind of knew going in, but was reaffirmed, like there aren't seeds that are only for cover crops. There are seeds that you can use also for the purpose of cover crops, which I think is probably, if you look at a beginner, like what's so special about it, right? Which is what we're going to dig into. Oh, it's not just something you're buying from a store or a seed shop that's only used for the purpose of cover crops. No, there is some beauty, I felt like, in it that, like, look at what God's going to do, right? It's going to let you grow the thing and then also give you that same thing to let you heal the thing, if you will.
So Batavia hates it when I do this, but I'm going to read you the definition of a cover crop and then just right below it something just to kind of set the stage if you're not sure, or, I think just make it easier for us in general. This is from the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education. A cover crop is a plant that is used primarily to slow erosion, improve soil health, enhance water availability, smother weeds, help control pests and diseases, increase biodiversity, and bring a host of other benefits to your farm. Cover crops have also been shown to increase crop yields, break through a plow pan, add organic matter to the soil, improve crop diversity on farms, and attract pollinators. There is an increasing body of evidence that growing cover crops increases resilience in the face of erratic and increasingly intensive rainfall, as well as under drought conditions. Cover crops help when it doesn't rain, and they help when it rains, and they help when it pours. So, I mean, if you read that, first of all, everybody that's listening to this show right now has definitely had something in there that a cover crop supposedly will fix. And it's like the cure-all, right? The magic cure-all. That's what it sounds like to me. How about you?
That's exactly. Those are the words I would have used as well. But it's even still the way that we're referring to it, a cover crop as if it's one singular thing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the thing is I just, before I ever get into anything, and when I read stuff like that, and I'm not calling anybody out. I'm not saying this is false. What I'm saying is this is how my mind works when I do this and I start looking at it and I say, look, it sounds pretty damn perfect. Is this snake oil? Because a lot of times you hear, well, it's good for this and it's good for that. It's good for hot. It's good for cold. It's good for shady days and sunny days. You're like, okay, well then why isn't it everywhere? But in reality, it is everywhere. You see cover crops all the time. You just don't know you see them.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part to me.
I was, when I was reading about this and I was thinking about the approach that many people take when it comes to applying cover crops, when I heard people describe them, using cover crops, they never described it as I'm trying to, well, most of them didn't, to solve this problem. It was almost like preventative, or maybe it's offensive versus defensive is the way that many people were describing it. Now, again, I know that, as we start to break this down, there are definitely things that people are trying to cure, so to speak, through the use of cover crops. But I also walked away from it thinking like, this is more of like hygiene for the garden, right? More of, a step as a part of your maintenance regimen,
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind there. And we have to be very careful, Batavia, and you and I do, because we just had a conversation before we aired, and you're already crossing over into that territory.
Not. You just want me to.
No, your words are pulling me into it.
So the use of hygiene for the garden, I paused because I felt very clever. I felt like I finally hit the nail on the head for what I was trying. And because you didn't acknowledge it, I know that Leonard's like,
I was hung up on the part when you were like trying to prevent something that hasn't happened yet. And while that is true, I think there's a an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Have you ever heard that? And while that is true at times, sometimes you can be doing more damage than good. And cover crops are a very good portion, or good, and we're going to break down each one of those things here in a minute. But cover crops are a good thing where if you do it right, I do believe it can help. But if you do it wrong, you're going to create the worst headache you've ever had in your life. And that's something that we really need to understand. And I like where you went with it when you were like, hey, I watched a video of a guy close to me, because that's really important because it's the same climate. Now look, as a person who has a YouTube channel, I'm saying you guys all got to watch somebody in North Carolina, but in all seriousness, it's good to focus around you because you start to learn what crops will do. And when we say crops from henceforth in this episode, we were talking, the word cover goes in front of it. Those will, you find out what will play well with your area and how much effort you want to put into it, because it's not a one crop fix all situation, but it's also not I need every single one in there because I have to fix every single problem. And that's something that's really important. So I'm going to tell you my story about cover crops real quick. The wild garden, negative, not the wild garden. One of my other garden beds one year, I had been reading about cover crops. This is probably about 4 years ago. And I got some winter rye grass seed and I put it in. I just threw it out in the garden, said, hey, let's see what happens. And I had a beautiful crop of grass in there. And it didn't winter kill, which we'll get into that. So in the spring, I had grass. I'm like, great. So easy enough. I turned it back in the soil. It was not an issue. Zero issues whatsoever. No issue at all. And my garden that garden bed did really good that year. Now, was it the cover crops? I don't know. But what it was is the bed didn't sit empty and idle for a long period of time. It was actively doing things in it. And the crops that we'll go over, a couple of them that are really easy and good starters. And, it was designed for that. And I had picked it out for a specific purpose. Fast forward to last year, I harvested my potatoes and then I let my bed sit empty for 2+ months waiting to put in my Brussels sprouts, and it was just empty. I should have put a cover crop in there to keep it active, keep the weeds down. So there's different times and different aspects to do it. Now, the cover crop that one of them I'm going to talk about, I specifically want to plant this year to help my bees out. But that's, and that's the pollinator aspect of it. So, that's my story into cover crops. And as I get more into monocropping, Batavia she's trying to quiz me. I love it. I love the behind the scenes quizzes. As we get into it, and you made me lose my train of thought. What was I saying? Into
cover cropping, monocropping. If you do more monocropping, you need more support with.
Right. As I get into monocropping, I'm finding there's times when beds can sit empty longer. And this is something that I can do to help with that. So my a part of my pause over these years about cover cropping is I'll speak for myself. I feel like this is next level gardening for me. I agree with that. I think that as I, dug a little bit deeper, I think the what and the what, meaning which ones are you using, and then for what and the when is not as complicated as I thought it was, right? So it's not like there are just 3 options here and that's it, but it's not as complicated. Like a lot of the principles are, very similar to other principles you use when it comes to gardening. But as someone that has been focusing on 3-season gardening and
the scheduling around that, the timing around that, the discipline around that, I look at it as I have two people in my life that have used the word friction. It's a colleague of mine for my work, my 9 to 5, and then you. And you all said it at the same time, which made me think like maybe I said it and they heard me. No, in all seriousness, like you all brought up kind of the reference to it around the same time. And I thought, okay, that's a sign that this thing's supposed to stick with me. So here we are, like I think it's like a year later from when you all first started saying it. For me, it still introduces this idea of friction into my garden space, right? You know, right. That I'm not in a place like I don't have the time and space to add this to my repertoire. However, so I won't be, the chances of me adding cover crops this year are slim to none. But the most important part is I understand more of the value. And it's not overwhelming in my mind. Like preparing for this episode helps demystify cover crops for me. And as a part of this episode, I'm hoping that you all walk away, everyone besides Leonard, because he insisted he was an expert on it.
He don't get it. Yeah.
I'm hoping.
He's like, I've been doing it my whole life. I grew up in a cover crop garden. Well, Vladdy,
literally born in cover crops, right?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that you all walk away feeling more comfortable, like it's not the mountain of things. If you've grown a garden before, you can figure out this bit of cover cropping, which I think it's empowering, if you will.
Right. And I mean, I kind of want to take that definition and just start breaking it down and, you know, the primary uses of it. And then we can talk about the secondary. I don't want to get into the tertiary. I just wanted to say that word. But you know, the first and foremost, and look, we have to understand, and Batavia hit it in the beginning, in the top of the show, was cover crops are widely used in farms. I mean, you don't even probably realize that you see a cover crop in a farm until you know what the crop is. And I mean, you know, I remember when I was a kid, everybody grew tobacco around here. I didn't even know it was tobacco. I just thought it was, you know, it could have been corn or whatever. But once I learned it, I can pick it out, you know, so it's going to be the same thing. But once you start learning about it, you'll start seeing it and you'll realize that, you know, a lot of this is used on farms. But if it's used on a farm, why can't it be used in a home garden on a micro scale? And that's something I don't understand the purpose, like the thinking behind by some people. It's like, oh, well, that's for farms. Well, what's the difference? There is no difference, right? And a lot of times the gardener, in my opinion, is putting more demand on their soil than the farm is, because we're doing 3-4 season gardening when they're throwing out a crop of corn and then they're done. You know, then they may actually do a cover crop after that. So, and that is the first one, was the slow erosion. So that's not rocket science. Anybody who's ever had a yard and has a bald patch in the yard knows about erosion, and that grass actually does have a purpose. And it's just the roots will hold it in place. So that's a give me. You know what I mean? That's obvious. Do you have anything else to say about slowing erosion?
Well, I mean, I think that, like you say, like it's an obvious, but I don't know that it's obvious of the impact. Like sometimes I feel like we think that plants are different than other growing things, right? You know,
Yeah.
like vegetable plants and herbs, like, you know, they're similar to weeds, similar to grass, right? Like, you know, like it's all the same thing. So that bald patch, which is such a good example in your grass, what do you think is going to happen if you try to plant, you know, a tomato plant next to it, you know, or in it, right?
Yeah.
So no, I don't have anything more on that than to say you know more about these things than you think you do.
Yeah. Now, I will say this: if your only concern is slowing erosion, something as easy as mulch can help with that. So don't think that you've like, oh, I've got erosion, I've got to run out and do this. You know, unless you're gardening on a hill or something, but like a general raised bed or a nice even bed, it's, you know, it's not the end of the world. But then you get into improving soil health. And I think we're going to park here for a minute, because there's a lot to be said there in there's a lot of different cover crops you can use. Usually we don't shout out places to purchase things, but I do use American Meadows, not necessarily to buy because they are a little expensive. Sorry, guys. You got a sale and everything's 20 cents off, not percent, but cents. But they have a lot of information on their website and, pollinator friendly and stuff like that. And you can go through here and you can pick like what your goal is for your cover crop and go through there. And improving soil health is a big one. And there's a myriad of ways you can do that by introducing microbes, by, allowing roots to break down and adding organic matter back into the soil, to adding nitrogen back into the soil, stuff like that. So there's a lot of them. Like if you go like anything that's a pea seed, peas have nitrogen nodules on the roots, and when you cut the plant off, leave the roots in the ground, they break down and release the nitrogen back in. It's a natural way to give nitrogen. Earlier, Batavia sent me a message behind the scenes and asked me if clover was what I was going to plant for my bees, and that is not what I'm going to plant. But it is known in your grass, in your yard, if you have clover, that it does put nitrogen back into the soil. And that's why a lot of times you'll see grass mixes with clover mixed in it for that purpose. So, that is something that you can use too. Now, we all know what clover is. Not only can you pick 4-leaf clovers, but it has flowers, gives nitrogen back, all that good stuff. But it also perennializes and can become a massive headache if you're not careful.
So helps improve your soil. That's where offense and defense come into play, right? So before reading this, the way that I looked at cover crops is you're trying to resolve a problem. So improving your soil would be improving some problematic soil, but after I've read a bit about it, this is the reason why I said earlier that, this is me getting ahead of a problem, right? Like the continual improvement of your soil, right? So that's a view that you can take when it comes to this. The clover, the reason why I thought for the bees was because of the flower element. And I'm sitting on my hands, the bit of the timing of it, the pain that it could become, that I heard that loud and clear when I was reading and when I was watching videos about this. You said it earlier on, like it could help or it could hurt, right? So I'm actually looking forward to hearing your opinions on that, because I was just like, Molly girl, you're in trouble. Like that's like all the articles were talking to me like this will be you. Know that this will be your problem.
Right.
But go on.
Well, and understand too that cover crops aren't just like, hey, in your garden, put clover in. That's not the purpose of it. And a lot of times, there's situations where you may make a garden bed and it may just be jacked up, and you've got to get it ready, so you may grow a cover crop in it for a year or two in order to prepare it for that. So, and that's more of like a homesteader type situation. Most people don't build a raised bed and said, I'm not going to use it for 2 years. But if that is the case, then you could do something like that. But you want to look out for the words perennialize and naturalize. Those are two terrible things for a cover crop, in my opinion, because we all know what perennials are, but naturalize means that it will basically make itself at home and continue to reproduce. May not live through the winter, but it could set its seed and go on and be very prolific at it. I was reading something earlier this year. I put down a bunch of wildflower seeds, and I got a lot of clover out of it, and it's used as a filler. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the world for what I used it for, but it's good to know that that is added into it. And you have to be very careful because that clover can take hold and just engulf the whole thing. But there's other options for it, and the trick is there's 2 tricks to it. Get a winter kill crop. Actually, there's more than 2. I don't know how many there's. We'll find out when I'm done. Get a winter kill crop, meaning winter comes and it dies. Your winter is cold enough to kill it. Timing, here we go with timing again. Timing, meaning don't let it go to seed. So if it's going to go to seed, you have to cut it before it goes to seed. And that's going to help you as well. And then there's also just, really staying on top of it so you don't create a cover crop turned into a weed situation.
Yeah, which...
that's something... which is just turning it into the soil.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
We're using in that description, weed is just a thing you don't want, right? The ding that would have been the third one had you not gotten to it. Not letting the thing go to seed. And that's the Molly girl, you're in danger. Like you'll look up and guess what's happened in my garden. I think I want to take one pinky toe step backwards in the help improve your soil. Be very careful with the conclusion that you could draw from, there's a problem with my soil, right? Last year was a bad year for X, this didn't grow the way I wanted it to. I must have a problem with my soil. That 1 and 1 doesn't always equal 2. So what I don't want us to do is walk away thinking, I didn't have the garden I wanted last year. Cover crops to the rescue.
Well, and you don't want to blindly do something. You need to be armed with information. You need to know, like, hey, this is, I need more of this nutrient, and so I'm going to add X into it. I need more nitrogen because my next crop, and this is where the garden knowledge really comes into play. When you're thinking, for instance, I know that once I pull my potatoes out, I'm going to put Brussels sprouts behind it. That's a very nitrogen hungry crop. So if I'm going to cover crop, I need to start thinking, well, what's going to add to that? What's going to help with that? If that's my main purpose. And so we go back to this whole notion of like thinking ahead, but this is part of it, because you could almost call a cover crop a mid-season crop, Now you can take some of these crops, like buckwheat, for example, grow it and harvest it if you really wanted to, which that's the one that I'm going to plant as buckwheat.
Okay.
It's one of the easiest to do. And look, whenever I get started in anything like this that seems, and cover crops to me are complicated to an extent. I always go, I go to the website and then I go to easy, right off the bat. And then that's what I stick with. There's one that says easy to grow. And so, buckwheat is one of them that I'll do. I click on it here. I can never, and this is the other thing, I can't remember which each one does, off the top of my head. I always have to go back and look at it. It loosens the topsoil, it prevents erosion. It's easy to kill. So that's what and it is great for adding green manure back into the home garden, which is basically improving the soil because you're adding that green manure. It will break down and it will add organic matter back. So you're kind of doing two things, not to mention buckwheat has all those little flowers that bees love. So that's why I'm doing it. The trick is, though, is once it flowers, you got to time it out on when you're going to kill it. And is killing it as easy as hitting it with a weed eater and knocking it back. And then you're creating more of that green matter back into the soil.
Yeah. So for all of you all keeping track, this is not year 1 for me. Yeah.
For you?
Don't start counting.
This is day 1.
Well, no, I say that because I have to work through the thing from start to finish in my head. And so you said, take a weed eater, which I don't own. I have a
right.
lawnmower from when I used to have grass that doesn't work because I didn't drain the gas out of it one winter, and it's just sitting in my garage now. So I think about this and say, I could use the hedgers to to chop this stuff down. I need to think through all right, what's the crop? What's the growth pattern? When am I going to be, chopping it, and how am I going to be chopping it if I'm going to be chopping it versus letting again, the winter kill it as an example. And I look at this and initially, if I knew that much, I would have said, not worth the trouble. Yeah. Now I feel like I know that much, and I feel like, again, I know enough now to be able to say, this is the crop and these are the reasons why. This is the cover crop, and these are the reasons why. You talked about this. This must have been in 22 when I had the trouble with the cage baby, and so I look back, and for those that don't remember, Tomato Gate 2022, it was when most of my, if not all of my tomato plants basically had they died off early. They got sick early. Still don't know.
Wasn't that 23?
No, last year was 23. It was 22 because I grew. I grew mostly brassicas in the cage baby last year, remember? Mm-hmm.
That's right. And
so the conversation in 22 was, well, have you considered putting a cover crop there? Basically, which could have been for the fall of 22, going into 23. One could argue it could have been for most of 23 even. I didn't, of course, because I grew brassicas there last year. But as I read through information for this episode, I saw the value in it, right?
And you rushed out and bought some?
No. I also balanced all of the good greens I got out of the cage baby. So that's also kind of the dance. When you talk about farmers doing cover cropping, the thought is that they have more land than most gardeners, and in turn they can afford to park these cover crops in this particular space, and the home gardener is always fighting for space, right? But there's also this bit of the reason why I say that there's a level of evolving in the garden, like the work you do today that pays off for tomorrow, right? So do you sacrifice a year of growing in the cage baby to improve the soil in the cage baby? I didn't, but it's something to think about. Right.
Well, and that's, I'm glad you brought up the cage baby because tomatoes are a big one. And there's this thing called root knot nematodes. And so and especially in the South, it's extremely common to plant mustard in the ground, and that will leave some kind of chemical behind that will fight the root knot nematode. And I don't know if it'll eliminate it or what it'll do. But but to get it to work, you have to leave the entire plant in the garden to rot away. Just like, I take this back. I used daikon radishes in the garden this year, in the wild garden, for the soil compaction. And you have to cut the daikon radish and leave the radish in the ground to decompose and create those channels within the garden in order for it to do what it said. Now, it's called a tillage crop. It will till, but if you pull it up, you're not really getting that huge benefit. So as it starts to decompose, you'll get it. And that's why I left that particular bed empty for as long as I did, so that it would, have that option to break down and use it, and just left it. So there's all kinds of options you can use. There's a bunch of different clovers you can do. The most common clover that I have seen and read about is, I'm going to get you the name for it. And it's the clover that's in the wildflower seed, which was interesting. And the state North Carolina uses it for feed plots for deer and stuff, but it's the crimson clover seed, red clover. And there's a lot of uses for that in itself. Apparently the flower is good for cancer fighting properties, supposedly. So there is that option as well. But it can naturalize, so you got to be really careful with that.
Yeah, I think as we close out, once we get closer to that, there is the where do you begin? So we're about 30 minutes in, and I still have this feeling of like, oh, there's a lot they can do if you go back to your definition that you read from the interweb. But which one should I be focused on? And I think that's where you really start. You need to try to improve, do you have some erosion issues? Are you looking to improve soil health because you just want to, or you've had some issues, right? I don't know if it's before or after this episode, but the root knot nematode was a question of the day, right? And you mentioned in the response, mustards are a good example of it. I think that's a way to uncomplicate what is cover crops. And even if you want to learn about it in that exact way, all right, what are good cover crops and what's the method to use if I'm trying to suppress disease or trying to manage through some disease or some pest that I have, right? Take it, what is it? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Well, you got to find your purpose. You need to find your purpose and what you're looking at, just like you said. And it's like, because we're only on number 2. of all they said, which, improving soil health, go for it. That's something that we all need to do. I feel strongly about that. We should all focus on our soil health more, but then you've got like enhanced water availability, smothering weeds. So enhancing water availability, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I am not sure what that means. I don't know.
So I came across it in my interpretation of it, what I thought I understood. Now you make me think maybe I didn't. You know how you say things like you think we generally underwater our gardens, right?
Yeah.
And
I just did a whole video about that before we started recording.
And, I believe a lot of gardeners understand like how much water that they should be adding to their garden. But I don't know if we all understand, for those of us that do, understand what it looks like when that water is really not being absorbed through the plants, right? And so your soil makeup could have some issues that make it less likely for those plants to take in that water. And so in that case, right, you're improving your soil for that purpose. That was my interpretation of it, right? But you need to know what that looks like in your plants to know if that's a need of yours.
Right. And a lot of times these are multi-purpose too.
Yeah.
So they're that's why I'm eyeing buckwheat. I've also been eyeing vetch for a while too. I'm not sold on it yet, but I'm eyeing it. But it's one of those things that you can use as well. So I'm going to have to say you're right, because I don't really know about enhancing water availability. I'm just being honest. Yeah. Smothering weeds, though, I do know about. And so that's something, again, I think we can all say, hey, I'm going to leave this garden bed blank for 6 weeks. Let me throw something in there and smother these weeds. And that's simple. It's just like the square foot gardening aspect. You put a lot of plants in there, the sun can't get down, the weeds struggle, they outcompete, bada bing, bada boom. You just don't want while you're smothering weeds, to create weeds in the process. That's kind of the issue.
Yeah, there's a part of, we've danced around this a bit on the podcast about whether or not I will in the future plant out all of my garden with spring plants or part of my garden. I've leaned into, I don't need to plant every single bed. And just because I haven't figured out how to really pull that off, but let's say that I want to continue down that road. A really good example of a good use of cover crops would be for those spaces I don't plan on coming in the spring to plant in. Add a cover crop to it in the fall, right? And going back to the gardener that's in the Midwest that I follow, and she's done some stuff on cover crops. She actually has a spring mix that she'll plant out, and so I think those things, going back to the idea of like you need to be very planful around it, I think those things are helpful. I'm huge on not leaving your soil bare. I've done it a couple of years and I've realized I pay for it, and so I think that I actually walked in and had to push down just use mulch. Right. That's easy, right? Multi-purpose, right? And then I realized that I was taking for granted the type of organic matter that you're producing with these cover crops. Some of them are, better than others compared to just using mulch.
Well, do you know what the difference of what you're adding in with green mulch versus regular mulch? As in
the green leaves, the greenery.
Yeah.
It's the green matter that you add when you're, what is it?
But do you know the nutrient that it's adding?
No, I don't.
So it comes from composting. Green adds nitrogen.
Oh, well, I know that.
And then brown adds carbon. So when you grow a cover crop and you cut it back and it falls to the ground, you're actually adding nitrogen in, versus if you put dead leaves on there, you're actually adding carbon in. So the key with that is, and I think this is something important to remember, is when you add that green back in, because, when you're composting, you want a mixture of green and brown. You don't want to just do all of one or the other because it won't really cook. Well, when you add that green back into it, and my interpretation of what's going on, just based off of my knowledge of composting, is that green manure, because it's adding nitrogen, will actually speed up the decomposition process of other organic matter inside of your garden at the same time. I felt like when I said that, I sounded really educated, and it made me uncomfortable. And I may be wrong. I may be perceiving it totally wrong.
Wouldn't be the first time an educator was wrong. Mouth. No. I mean, so from what I've read, the same things. Someone commented and said, for people that do produce compost, sometimes it's harder to find your greens towards the end of the season, right? And this is an opportunity for you to do that. The way I looked at it, like, why not just use compost, was also the work that those plants, the cover crops you're using, is doing within the soil compared to just it's ironic that it's cover, compared to just a blanket of leaves, right? So of course the leaves are organic matter, but, it's kind of like basic versus advanced, right? And the cover crop being the advanced version of that.
Well, there's arguments out there too to leave garden beds full of weeds. If you're not going to plant them, just leave the weeds in there to keep the soil active. There's an argument for that. I don't like that because I just create myself a headache in the future, but there is an argument for that. And you got to go into the aspect, like you want to smother weeds. And we've touched on this, like help control pests and diseases. This is one of those things where I don't want to say go for it, but if you have a problem with something or it's very susceptible in your area, you may want to kind of investigate that as a preventative measure. Because you're getting multiple benefits. So that's something that I can't really say enough about, is you're going to get multiple benefits from these cover crops.
Yeah. Let me know when you're ready to get to once we're at because I'm trying to watch your time here. Once the cover crop is done, the initial stage of what it's going to do, and now you're ready to get rid of it in your garden.
Okay. Well, then before I do that, let me just say, if you want to start with a cover crop and you don't know where to start, I would look into a mixture cover crop. I was talking on the radio the other guy to a gentleman. You can check out his farm he's got going. It's called ValhallaOrganics.org, I believe. I told him I'd give him a shout out. And he uses a lot of cover crops. And he was saying that he was like, man, I just get I say grab bag, but it's like a mixture of like different ones. Now he's doing bigger areas of it, but you can get like pollinator cover crop mixes, fall cover crop mixes. You can get stuff like that that's more so designed for it. So you get a good, healthy mixture of all this stuff to put in. Now, I don't know if that would really work well for like a small raised bed or like a bigger garden plot. I'm kind of torn. I don't see what it really matters, but I know I would look into each one of those things in there and make sure that you can't get the perennialization or naturalization in your garden. I think that would be an issue. I felt like
that was the only downside of the kind of the mixed, right? The fall mix or the spring mix, is you're going to get some things that by themselves could be problematic, but knowing that is half the battle, right? So if it is in your mix, don't go pulling it out, but just know that may change the timing of when you try to cut that thing back. So I think there's also, again, when I mentioned earlier on, the beauty in, talk about a way to use the surplus of seeds.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, I will tell you what I'm planning on using this year is I'm going to use buckwheat this time of year, and then winter ryegrass in the fall. And then I'm not sold on the vetch yet, or which vetch, VETCH, that I'm going to use. But one of those, I may use a vetch as well. But all of those basically do the same things. So where did you want to land? Because it is now time for us to land.
So I read about hairy vetch, and I feel like I'm a teenager that can't stop giggling about it. So where did I want to land, Leonard? Oh, all right. So you've figured out this is the thing you're trying to manage in your garden, whether it's, improving nitrogen, which we quickly went through the peas, right? Many of the peas do that, whether it's breaking up compacted soil, some of those root crop type, seeds do that. Or if it's something else, right? You're dealing with some type of pest, the root knot nematode. So you figured that bit out, and you figured out which cover crop individually or as a part of a mix that you're going to plant, and it's grown. And now what? This is the part where I wasn't buying it as an individual gardener when it came to I'm going to cut it back and I'm going to work it into the soil. And I've just been watching it, this is before I started reading about it, watching it like, gosh, you're inviting problems here, aren't you?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say I saw somebody on YouTube with it, and they were like, oh, I just go out there with my scythe and I cut it all back. I'm like, dude, who's got a scythe? Like, the Grim Reaper ain't here, dog. Like, we ain't got this. Like, what are you talking about? Nobody has a scythe. So, essentially, I never watched that individual again because I was like, it's just stupid. And realistically, from what I understand and what I plan to use, it's about a 6-week growth cycle, from planting to maximum cutback time. So 6 weeks, roughly, you cut it, and you should be catching it before the seeds because if the seeds pop, boy, oh boy. Now, I will tell you that I did the winter rye that year, and like I told you, I wasn't sure because I came out, it was spring, and it was the best looking grass in the whole world. I mean, you couldn't tell nobody nothing. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. So I went out there, and I cut it, and then I took my shovel, and I stuck it in the ground, and I flipped it over, and I just said, I'm going to plant. I mean, I don't know what to do. I'm going to see what happens. And I had no problems whatsoever with it. So I was surprised by that. Now, when I say flipped it over, and I mean, if you're like, oh, I don't want to till, no till, well, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to turn it into the ground, which means you don't have to till, but you're going to have to stick a shovel in the ground deep, pull those roots up, flip it over, expose the roots, and then bury it again. And then that should help with it. So if you're really concerned about it, I just wouldn't water right afterwards either, because you can leave the roots exposed to dry out and then the plant will die.
Yeah, and forgive me because I wanted to get to the part of what do you do with it, and I skipped over the timing bit. Almost everything I read talked about you need at least 4 weeks if you're doing this in the fall before your average last frost. And I'm so glad you said about 6 weeks. I think you're so much better off if you err on the side of a little bit longer. Because think about, again, farms that I generally look at as open fields, right? And then think about many of our garden spaces that have obstructed views from the sun, right? So the time to produce may be longer for you, and you don't want that to be all for naught. Right. So I like the idea of about 6 weeks. I also observed chop and drop. So not just cutting and then turning over into the soil. I saw a lot of that, but I saw chop and drop. I saw things like using it as mulch, the greens. I didn't like that idea. Again, that part is absolutely surface. I continue to look at what critters is that going to invite, right? To your garden by having this now kind of living mulch, if you will, I shouldn't say living mulch. That would be if you just let it stay there. So I think when I talk about like, what do? I think it's just like anything else we talk about. You got to have the plan. Don't drop those seeds and start watering them, in late summer and then not know what you're going to do with it on the other side. I'm not ready to accept that this is just one more arm or leg of gardening, but if I'm honest with myself, it is. It's all the same principles, Excuse me.
Yeah, and you can get immense joy from doing it as well. I don't want anybody to think you can't.
Yeah, but it's also, so the same principles. It's think about crop rotation, which clearly I love, right? Think about companion planting with clearly I love. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, but the idea is one thing will benefit the other, right? You'll benefit if you plant this thing after you've grown tomatoes, you know. And I think it's that same concept. And if you can start to look at it that way, I think that, and I guess maybe I'm coming from the seat of maybe a number of our listeners are like, I'm not into that. I guess if you're still here, you must be into it somewhat. If you're still here at this point. Yeah. And so I think there is a bit of me convincing you, like, it may be worth another stroll around the park and thinking about this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you what I plan to do with my buckwheat this year is I'm going to grow it, and then probably, because it's summertime, I'd say around 4 or 5 weeks, I'm going to cut it, but I'm going to let it grow back. So I guess maybe that would be like a living mulch. I don't really know what the true definition is. But before I go to plant again, then it's going to all get turned in like a week before. I mean, let's see, if I harvest my potatoes, I'm going to say June 1st, just because that means I have about 8 weeks to do it. So I could get a crop in there, no problem. You know what I mean? And so we're just going to work it that way and see what happens. And, you know, it's like I said on a recent YouTube video, if you don't try it, you're never going to know. You'll never, ever know. And you're going to be sitting there every year talking about, I wonder if the cover crops are really going to work. Just give it a shot, you know? Put it in half a bed. Put it in a pot. I don't care. Just try something out and see what happens. It's
definitely a muscle that you need to exercise, right? Develop and exercise, right? And you're halfway there developing it because you garden, right? And, you know, give it a try. It may, you know, what's understood may not need to be said, but I'll say it anyway. Read about it and give it a try. There's nothing that I read that made me think, no, thank you.
Right. And the other thing, too, is planning. Planning is important. And lucky for you, absolutely lucky, we have a way to plan for you. Get the Planter app, man. Sponsors the show. We love it for good reason. If you are growing and you need to find up space to plant something, or you're looking ahead, just like I did with my potatoes, into my buckwheat, or not my buckwheat, listen to me, my Brussels sprouts, and I knew there was going to be a gap in between planting. Well, guess how I figured that out? I used the Planter app because it's a drag and drop interface, square foot design, very visual, hundreds of varieties, flowers. Mustard's on there. I believe buckwheat's on there. Just you name it. So check that out below. Take advantage of it. They've got the seed box. We've got a discount code below that gives you a very nice discount on all grades of membership. Just do yourself a favor and get the lifetime, because you will not be upset. It's available in the Google and Apple store. It's the Planter app. Oh, and did I tell you, you can use it on your phone, your tablet, and your PC. I'm telling you, you guys got to use it on your PC. It's a total game changer. Ladies and gentlemen, the Planter app is where it's at.
So just a quick note, my current favorite piece of the Planter app is the mobile feature, because when I told you all my garden was 90-something% planned out, you know, I unraveled some of that plan, and I felt super duper comfortable being in the garden, making an adjustment to the plan on the app and saying, okay, yeah, that works, you know, versus trying to kind of run all of it through my head like I have in previous years, right? Like I'm able to pivot as it relates to what I'm planting. Really good example was I decided to flip-flop where I was growing onions and sweet potatoes, putting the onions in the bed that gets the most sun in the cage baby, because I'm going to harvest those earlier, which means I can plant for fall in that space and it gets the most sun, compared to the sweet potatoes, which will be in my garden until the frost. So there's nothing that really comes after that. And I was able to make that swap and keep on moving within the app.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the question of the day?
Of course I am.
All right, so this one comes from our email, which, if you guys want to send us a question, is bygquestion@gmail.com. I need to put a link in the description. I keep forgetting. Leonard, add it to... I'm not going to do it. You do it, not me. And then also on Facebook, Community Gardens, Backyard Gardens, Community Garden Facebook page. There we go.
So for the record, offline, you've asked Leonard to do it at least twice. And I sat back and I said, okay, I mean, if you really want it done, you're going to have to do it yourself. And here we are.
Well, now Batavia's talking bad about
Third
you.
time's a charm.
All right. So Amy writes, slug help.
Hey, Amy.
She scrunched her face not because of your name, but because of the slugs, because they are gross.
Well, I scrunched my face. Well, yeah, definitely because of the slugs. But then I'm still confused. I felt like my request was to say, hey, after the question.
Well, it just doesn't work that well. So just take it what you get. All right. Amy writes, hello, I'm in desperate need of slug help, and they try to take over every year, and I struggle to stay on top of it. I go out and pick them by hand in the evening with gloves and put them in hot, soapy dish soap water. I also use Sluggo, an organic slug and snail killer, but it's expensive, and I only get it effective for a week or two. I'm in northern New York. We get bad Japanese beetles too, which I use the traps and then dump every morning in the ground for my chickens to gobble up. A few may get away, but it makes a huge difference. And the bag doesn't get yucky because it's emptied every day. We experience potato bugs, which also just hand-picked into soapy water, and that worked good. But if you have any advice on slugs, I would be so grateful. I have considered getting ducks, but I'm really not up for it, and I wouldn't have them free-ranging in my garden anyways. I love the podcast. I listen every week and have a large, no-till, deep mulch. Probably my slug problem. Plus, I live on a lake. The garden and I am expanding to market garden this year. No-till has been amazing. It's easy, lazy gardening. Just the slugs is all so terrible. Thank you. Whew. I didn't read that before I got into it. Amy, that was long, but I appreciate it.
That's my kind of question.
Yeah, it's but you know what? It's good because, and I scanned it and I saw Japanese beetles and I was like, well, no. And then I saw what she had going on and she had some really good points there. Do you get slugs, first of all?
I don't. And every time I get a question like this or a comment, I just feel like the garden gods have they like me.
Well,
they
that
can't
may or
like
may
everyone.
not be so.
I'm sorry,
How's our cage
Amy.
baby doing? So look, I can tell you what I do for slugs. When I lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, back in the day, we had slugs horrible, and it was just like I did just like Amy did. I went out there every night and I would pluck them, and I could never get them. So what I ended up doing is I got a 2x10, a 4-foot section of 2x10, and you could get as long as you want. And I put it on the ground, and I poured water underneath, put it on the ground, and let it sit. And then every day, in the middle of the day, I'd flip it over, and I would kill every single slug under there. And it only took about maybe a week before that was it. And it was dramatically dropping off to where there was no more in there. Now, I also picked up inside of the garden as well. So I would definitely during that time go look. And I know clearly she's got a big garden. She's doing a market garden. So she's got a large one. But setting traps, and I don't like beer traps. I did beer traps one year and I got a bunch of bees. I got a bunch of everything else except for what I wanted. Sluggo, it adds phosphorus into your garden, which you cannot get out. It's not like it's a forever chemical, but it's very difficult to neutralize or get out of your garden. So I stopped using that. I had high phosphorus in my garden, so I don't use that anymore. So be careful with that. I think it's good in conjunction. Like you can apply all of these in there. So if you wanted to use a Sluggo, start with that, put the traps out at the same time, and then just hand pick, and you will make a difference. But it's not going to get better year after year.
Do you think there's anything, so, they like, moist, dark, damp spaces. So I've read before about how, they hatch eggs in the spring and then you're kind of stuck unless you take some steps that you've described. Is there anything like come spring that Amy and others can do. We've had this slug question before, and I've poked around, and I've not been really able to find any recommendations. Like, can you get ahead of them?
I just told you how.
Getting ahead of them isn't putting the piece of wood down.
Yeah, it is. If you start early, you will start taking them out of the population quickly.
Okay, so earlier than that. That was my question.
Oh, that well, I mean, she kind of has a point too, where she's using deep mulch. And, it's the whole idea about. I just about broke my neck trying to keep my face in front of the microphone. It's kind of the same idea of like with the roly-polies, where it's that deep mulch is just festers snails, slugs, roly-polies. And by the way, their roly-polies are not pill bugs. Thank you.
I hate when I have to say, I feel like I have to say, also known as pill bugs. I use the same piece of wood trick for my roly-polies sometimes.
And it works. But with the slugs, I don't even touch them. I just get salt and I go out there because it's on the outside of my garden and I pour salt on them and it desiccates them and you're done. And so, you can do that and always leave it in the same. The way I looked at it is always left it in the same spot because that board would cause that mulch to kind of rot and make it even more desirable. Yeah. So, if you can get an old piece of wood or something like that, but I made it nice and wide so there was plenty of room. And then I'd go out there and you just hit them. You just nail them. I'm
doing something different on the patio when it comes to containers. And I can't remember the logic behind it, but I had pieces of plywood that I basically laid flat onto the patio concrete. And then I put think milk crate, but shorter. And then I put the containers on top of it. It's been like that for years. I do things like grow bags and other things on top of it. And so I'm changing that up. And I remove the containers, remove the little crate, and then I pulled up the plywood. And baby,
yeah. Now I'm glad you brought up plywood. For this slug trick, I do not recommend plywood because it easily warps. So you want a good, sturdy, wide, like a 2x8 or a 2x10. You can go get an 8-foot 2x10 and cut it into 2 sections and just put it. Depending on how big your garden is, like I've got 4x8 beds, and I would put. You just go to YouTube and you'll see the design of my garden. But I would put one in front of each bed and the top, and then I would work it down each way. So next day or two, I'd move it, and then I'd move it again, and just work my way around it constantly. And it's it really does work. It's one of those things where chemicals didn't work, nothing worked. It was trapping and picking that really works.
You're putting it inside of the bed, right? You're putting on the outside of
the bed. Yeah, because they'll go to it during the daytime and they'll hide. Because she's got that deep mulch, it's probably causing them to get in there and hang out. And so the best thing you could do is, I know you don't want to, but if you're really having a problem with it, is remove that mulch out for a period of time and then put it back. And that's just, it's not going to hurt anything. You're actually probably doing a favor because it'll be turning it up and adding more oxygen into it.
Yeah, that's, again, slugs and roly-polies are not the same. But some of the similar methods that you've described is what I use for my roly-polies, and removing some of the leaf mulch is a step that I take earlier in the season. And it's a pain because it's the reason you're adding it for, you're removing it, so you're not able to get those benefits. So yeah, I think that, kind of to close out, we're a little bit over here. Idea from what I believe is a trusted source is one of the extension services. The recommendation was ground covers like spotted dead needle create an inviting slug habitat by shading soil and keeping it cool and moist, right? So keep that in mind as far as your do's and don'ts.
Yeah, you want your trap to be the most invitable place out there. It's their guest home that they think. And then when you flip that board over, the executioner's here, baby. That's how I used to tell my wife. I'd come in, and I'm not lying, I'd come in after killing slugs, and I'd be like, I'm going to get Grim Reaper tattooed on my forehead. Because I want them to see that the last time. But everybody, thank you so much. If you'd like to be like Amy and send us a question, you can do it through email, bygquestion bygquestion@gmail.com, or you can do it through the Facebook page, Backyard Gardens Community Garden. Please check us out, buy some seeds. The link is below. Use that discount code. I'm not telling you again what the discount code is. You should have listened the first time. We've got some good seeds, and we will be adding fall seeds soon. So thank you, everybody. And remember, whether or not you choose to grow cover crops, this is really important. Whether or not you choose to grow cover crops, you still sat here today and you did something important. You learned to grow, and now you're going to grow for change.
It's not you, it's him. He's not giving you the code again because he gets tongue-tied every time he says 1 million written out, using the letters or the number. So there you have it. I did you that solid. See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.